It is my pleasure to present an interview that I have long waited for with Crystal Clark, who has just recently written a very compelling and extensive article which touches on many of the things that are my concern equally, and the points she makes are eloquently delivered. I can anticipate them because I've read her paper twice, studiously. So, without much ado, I would like to add one thing, and that is that she has published two books. The first is in revision, and the second is a fictional account, which is more illustrative, and I recommend it highly. She is about, I think, to be inspired to maybe write a third book. Let's hope so. Crystal, I welcome you to the interview, and I'm looking extremely forward to some of your comments. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh, very, very good. And I'd like to ask you, when we have been talking recently, you've mentioned some of the aspects of your work, and in fact, your influence, which comes from a number of sources, one of your most dear being, of course, Walter Russell. And would you care to discuss some of the experiences you've had recently with the Russell fan club? Let's put it that way.
Well, I wasn't aware of Walter Russell when I started all of this, and it's always really welcoming to find somebody who understands our situation in that we are abusing technology to our own detriment, and that in the long term it's not survivable as a whole, as a species, as a race, as a planet. I was introduced to his work through a friend of a friend, actually. And it was really interesting because there was a period in my life where I went through, I call it dream time, where I learned a great deal of information in my dreams. And there was an image. It was very rare that I actually was shown images. But there was this one particular image that I had seen in a dream years ago that I only knew how to describe as a Tibetan mandala. And it wasn't until I was introduced to Walter Russell's work and began looking at some videos produced. The individual that is teaching Walter Russell's work, his name is Matt Presti, and his website is The Secret of Light, based on Walter Russell's book and his work. And when I was going through the videos of these beautiful sketches that Walter Russell had made, because this was in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, where he was using chalkboards and color chalk, beautiful, beautiful images to help explain his work. And I saw in one of those videos the image that I had seen years before, and until then I really didn't understand it. His work is exceptionally beautiful to me because he understands that nature and life and design is based on rhythmic balanced interchange, and that we have to have that as a means of survival, and that it applies not just to creational design, but also to our relationships with one another in terms of the pendulum swinging so far one way. When it gets out of balance on one end, it will eventually swing the other way too far because there isn't rhythmic balanced interchange going on. And in terms of relationships, where he applied this creational design process, he once very beautifully explained that, especially in terms of the elitism that we have now and the dichotomy of subjugation and the master-slave construct, he explained that when people are oppressed for a very long period of time, where the pendulum is all the way one way, that eventually the slaves will rise against their masters and it will swing all the way the other way. And it just continues back and forth. This imbalance is the basis for war and strife. It's really beautiful. I probably would have gotten much farther in my own work if I had known about it at the time, but I think that people who go down this road, if they go down it sincerely and with an open mind, eventually come to the same conclusions.
Do you feel that he had access to extra knowledge?
He absolutely did, and in fact, he said he did. Now, there are individuals teaching his work in a purist fashion. And what I mean by that is that they don't deviate from anything he said one iota. And I understand why they do that, because there are people who have derived their own conclusions from his work, never said that's where they got it, and have butchered it in the process. So I understand why they do that. But, filters is something that I've talked a lot about, especially in my written work, in that people define their experiences based on the filters or their personal disposition, I guess we could say. And Walter Russell claimed that he learned what he did by walking and talking with God for a specific length of time. I think it was 40 days, actually. But what does that mean? Did he have an experience like I had? Was he getting information in his dreams? And because he lived in a culture so enveloped in a Christian mindset that he, very much like Edgar Cayce, would project everything through that filter, if that makes sense.
Well, you identify, in that respect, you identify more with Edgar Cayce than you do Mr. Russell, don't you?
I do. I think that everybody has their own piece of the puzzle. And if we can get past the filters that they may place on themselves, that their own culture may have placed on them. And I think in some cases there are people that may not even adhere to the cultural tone of the day, but can't release their work in a way that makes it acceptable if they don't do it through those filters. They don't want to rock the boat kind of thing. So they both had a very Christian bent in their work, but that doesn't make it any less spectacular.
Would you care to describe you acquired your extra knowledge?
Well, it's kind of a long series of events over many years, and I will condense it the best I can. I've had two primary careers throughout my life, and one is in technology and the other is in logistics. And once technology began to be incorporated into logistics through barcodes and the just-in-time system, it was easy to go back and forth. Many years ago, while I was still in the logistics field, there was a woman that I worked with who was very, very psychic. And she was hired while I was on maternity leave, so I met her when I came back. And this was a very, very corrupt environment. She was really the only ally that I had, which was very nice to at least have one. And she had invited me to go see a local psychic here in Las Vegas that she heard was very, very good. And part of my punishment for not, quote, playing ball at this location was an extra day of work a week. So I was working 7 days a week, and I was working, 6 days a week, 80-hour work weeks, very, very long hours. I was on call 24 hours. I had taken an extra day off to spend with my family because I had a newborn at home and I was exhausted. And that was the day that she wanted me to go. And I didn't want to, but I also, like I said, she was my ally and I didn't want to be offensive. So she said, well, it's only a half an hour out of your day. I said, okay, I'll go. I had a previous experience with a psychic that's in the article, so I won't go into it here. So I didn't really take this very seriously. It was more of a keep the peace PR kind of thing for our friendship, actually. She booked our sessions back to back. I went first, and I was in there for an hour and a half. And this particular psychic was very, very, very good. And she actually, at the time, gave me my future 6 years in advance, which I didn't know until time passed. And one of the things that she said to me was that my offering, I guess you could say, into the collective as an individual here, that I would also learn from through offering that gift, was to be a writer and a healer. I was really wrapped up into the corporate mindset. I believed what came out of the television. I thought I was really smart because I watched Charlie Rose and CNN, So I thought, well, she's good, but she's kind of a nut. I didn't really take it seriously. When it was over, I went outside, waited for my friend, and thought about what I would do when I got home. Over the course of time, things got much, much worse at this location that I was working at. I ended up leaving. I went back into the technology field, which was even worse. And I got to the point where every company that I worked for was so corrupt that I just couldn't do it anymore. So I left the corporate world, even knowing that my family would go bankrupt, and we did, because I was the breadwinner. It was a very difficult time. And so I had a lot of time on my hands, and people don't realize that time really is the coin of their life and that other people are spending it for them. And when you really have time that you can spend however you want, doing whatever you want, you can really get somewhere as an individual in terms of personal growth. I was reading a lot. I remembered what she said about being a writer, and I thought, well, I'll try it. I started looking at things that I've never really had the time to, and I really looked at everything. I looked at, papers written about time-reversed human experiments, AI, ancient civilizations, psychic abilities, past life regressions. I really looked at everything, and I started to see these threads running throughout the material. And I'm a pattern person, so I began to notice these patterns, and I thought, well, I'll write a book about that. It started to feel kind of hollow, though. And I say this because years before, my family and I had moved to a small mining town where we were being poisoned through the water supply. And a year after I left that location, I had called the CDC and the EPA to complain. And of course, they gave me the runaround, but they actually went and fixed it. But because of my experience being poisoned as a teenager and getting really sick, watching my family get sick, once I graduated high school and I left, I moved here to Las Vegas, and I used to subscribe to the local newspaper. And most of the stories that I would read, especially towards the back of the paper, were about another river being poisoned. And this was in the early 90s. And ironically, most of these rivers were being poisoned with nuclear waste. So I've always been really environmentally conscious. So while I'm looking at all the things that I wanted to explore but never could, I'm also looking at environmental issues. And the more I looked, the worse it got. And I became really concerned. And my thoughts began to organize around, I see this pile of problems, but I don't see an answer. And so at night before I would go to bed, I would meditate. And to me, meditation means focus, not clearing the mind, but actually focusing the mind on something specific. And I was literally asking, I didn't know who I was asking, but I was asking, what am I supposed to write about that can help this way? I wanted it to be more meaningful, and I started to get information in my dreams. It was fun at first. It was exciting. It was very helpful. But then I realized I couldn't turn it off. And so this went on for 9 months. And every night I was getting information in my dreams. And the next day I realized I only had my waking hours to process what I was being taught before I would be taught something else. And that's important. The reason it was difficult is that the human mind needs belief. And this is something that a lot of people don't really
Let me ask a question at this point, if I may.
Okay.
Would you parallel this experience with Russell's walk in the wilderness for 40 days?
It's the only thing that I can parallel it with without the filters of religion and mysticism.
You had the luxury of actual luxury time, which, in my opinion, is the most important opportunity we have in this life. Because without the luxury of your own time, you can't explore like you have, and you've put it to very good use. But we know, if we look at Walter Russell, Dr. Russell, we know that he was influenced by Christianity, and he paralleled his vision, his experience, with a euphemism that parallel that with Christ. Whereas you, so much more interestingly, in my opinion, have done so with the experiences that you've actually had in life. You followed to your own full ramifications, like threats to the environment that poison you and your family, and what you could do about it, and you did something about it. You followed it to its fullest ramification. Now, that sets you apart.
That's the thing. Walter Russell claimed that he walked and talked with God, and that's where he learned what he learned. I had access to a source of information where I learned what I learned in terms of extra knowledge. What that source is, I don't know that it matters what we call it. We just know that it is and that we can access it, or at least we should know, which I think is something a great deal of effort has been expended to ensure that we wouldn't know. It's almost taboo. Nostradamus was another individual who had access to this information. Cayce, I think everybody can access it in their own way, but it can be accessed. And there is information there that we don't have here. And for me, that made all of the difference, because what I learned through that information, I never would have learned through books, because what we have in terms of written knowledge is so distorted, manipulated, and incomplete.
Would you compare your experience in acquiring this extra knowledge through dreams? Would you compare it favorably with what people describe as lucid dreaming?
You know, I hear that phrase a lot, and I really don't understand what it means. Lucid dreaming, what does that really mean? Are you in control? Well, not consciously, because the conscious mind has a tendency to get in the way. But is there intent? That's a term that I don't really use. The thing about getting information in dreams is that the conscious mind is sleeping. It's not interfering in the process. So you can set the tone. It's like this gigantic internet. And if you focus on something specific before you go to sleep, it's like making a query on Yahoo or Google. And then while you're sleeping, while the conscious mind is sleeping, you get the answer. Is that lucid dreaming? I don't know.
I would hypothesize, since I don't have the luxury of dreaming, I would hypothesize from what I've read about people's reports of lucid dreaming and what I know you've told me about yours, that the major distinction between yours and theirs is that you have the mind of an activist. You don't let something pass you by without analyzing it, taking it apart, putting it back together, and seeing how it works afterwards. You do that, and you do that automatically, and I don't think you realize how rare that is. So when you have what might be a lucid dream to someone else, you tear it apart. You get the most out of it. It's like squeezing that last bit of juice out of an orange or whatever, but you're not happy until you've got the full profit of the experience. And I see that in you. So I think that it may just simply be you that are the essential difference between the lucid dreaming of others and this conduit for extra knowledge that you have.
Well, I mean, that could be, but I really try hard not to make extraordinary claims, because that's another kind of elitist thing, and I don't like. I'm not a psychic. I can't tell you your future. I'm a lucky guesser in a lot of ways. I do get extra information, but I don't claim to be an indigo or a star seed or a prophet or a global clairvoyant. And I think that's important to demystify the process, because I think that people can do it. But I think that what really makes it work is that you have to be emotionally invested. There has to be an emotional intensity that drives the will. Does that make sense?
I think it does. I would go a little further and add intellectual integrity, which is something that I see missing in a lot of people today that have the spotlight. You don't jump to an easy conclusion. And, when you see people doing, generally it's for their own profit, whatever they're valuing. So no, you maintain your objectivity until you come to something that you can share with other people to the extent they can put their teeth in it too, which is what I respect very much about you.
It is, unfortunately, a very common thing in our society for people not to think of themselves as a contributor but a taker.
Yes.
So we don't think of ourselves as somebody who, what can I offer to the world to make it better, and what can I learn in the process of doing that? Many, many people, especially if they're in the spotlight, do it because of what they can get from it. And of course, we see this, unfortunately, in the quote, New Age spiritual movement, in the just live in the now. Well, we are where we are because so many generations before us did that. And if we keep doing it, we won't survive it.
It's a good lesson.
Yeah. It's a very good lesson. It's a hard lesson, but it's a lesson.
Well, at some point or another, all of us go through that period of taking that for granted and then waking up to find out that we haven't done our part. We haven't fulfilled any purpose to help avert things that are happening that we know where they'll lead. And that's not going to help anyone to survive very long.
That's very, very true. And this is the really important thing that I learned from my dreams, which is what makes it extra knowledge and how I know it was extra knowledge. And this is also the reason that I eventually contacted you, because what I learned in my dreams is today what we're told is that there are just these cycles, these really nasty cycles. Maybe they're solar cycles, maybe they're carbon cycles, and they happen every so often. And if you're unlucky enough to live during one of those cycles, well, everybody dies and everything starts over, and that's just the way it is. Well, that's not true. Every single previous cataclysmic destruction episode this planet has seen was self-caused. It was caused by the people living in those times through the misuse of technology. That's what I primarily learned through my dreams that I could not get through book knowledge, because nobody will say it. They don't know. They don't want you to know. We have done this before over and over and over again. And when I realized what this is, I realized that we are not only on the same path, but almost at the end of that road. We have a very short time to turn it around, because eventually we will get where we're going, the same way all of those who came before us once did. And learning that in dreams taught me what to look for in our present as examples that I could point to, which is something that you also have explained that you do, and I totally understand it because I've had to do it too. Once I realized what it was I was being taught, and that this was one of the main conclusions that I was meant to draw from it, then I could go back through everything I had ever read and pinpoint immediately examples that I could use to show people. And some of the best examples that I found were past life regression sessions. Because even if it was Edgar Cayce, and he was called the sleeping prophet because he found some way to go into some kind of a trance without going to sleep at night, where he could shut off the conscious mind and access what he called the records that were written upon the skein of time and space. So, he was accessing things a little bit differently, but he was doing it, and he would often comment to people that there was something from their past that they hadn't reconciled yet, and that was tripping them up. And he would occasionally go into the circumstances under which these past experiences had developed. From that, I could glean a little bit about things that were being done in the past that we are repeating now and where they go. I found a little bit of it in Dolores Cannon's work. There was one particular past life episode, which I included in the first book, in the beginning of the book, because I wanted people to get how important this is. It was the last few moments of a previous civilization that this person had went back to, and they were talking about the experiments the scientists had done with their atmosphere and how it was cooking everything. We're going through that right now. And based on what this individual recalled, this is not something we can survive very long, because they didn't. And so it becomes more difficult. There are examples, of course, in Forbidden Archaeology, that wonderful book by Michael Cremo. There's the Baghdad Battery. The other night on the Kevin Smith show, the Dark Knight satellite was brought up, which is incredible because that's leftover technology from a previous lineage. Not having access to the knowledge of our ancestors and what they went through really trips us up, because people are being told that, they were cavemen, that we just evolved out of green slime and we're the smartest thing that's ever lived, that we're at the pinnacle of civilization, but that's not true. There were societies or lineages before us whose technology was even more advanced than ours. But when it's misused, because it always deals with natural processes, and when those become weaponized, self-destruction is inevitable.
Absolutely. And that seems to be the one leading enterprise of the people that are running the earth today, is making of weapons, which is probably the most profitable business enterprise, even more so than the illicit drugs that they run, and launder vast amounts of money to control economies throughout the world. But in the last few months, there have been phrases like eternal war. And of course, this has been behind what they have been up to ever since World War I. When you can justify secret keeping, or create an illusion of justifying secret keeping with the expedience of having to keep everything quiet from the enemy and the people that are making the decisions about who to put in power, who to vote for, or whatever, have essential knowledge that they need to be wise in doing so. The control is completely in the hands of the secret keepers, and it no longer is a matter of cause of national security or the benefit of the public. It's in the cause of maintaining a system that will increasingly become inbred and incorporate fewer and fewer people and become more and more single-mindedly destructive. And that's what we have today. It's nearing a point where it's just totally out of control to any cause or any purpose that is anything more than of benefit to a very, very few people. And it's undeniable now, even to people that don't want to see it.
Yes, I mean, that's very, very true, but I think what the public at large is being denied is this is not just about subjugation and control and oppression, because they are killing nature to kill us. They are weaponizing natural systems. The bees are dying in record numbers. If the bees go, we go. The genetically modified food. I mean, these are things that, ironically or not, the powers that be themselves will not survive, nor did their predecessors. And when I say predecessors, I'm not talking about people that go off planet and hide and then come back and it's the same families and their ridiculous bloodline nonsense. It has nothing to do with that. By predecessor, I'm talking about mentality. Those who have tried it before did not survive it. They won't survive it. So I think it's really important for us to try to reach them if we can, because everybody wants to live, and they especially want to live so bad they want to live forever. I mean, that's the one common ground that we can meet on, regardless of race, social status, creed, religion. Everybody wants a future, but we have to understand what that will take and that we have to do it together.
Absolutely. They have a one-track mind, the powers that be. They have been on this track now for the last 40 years to convince us, and they love to control us through our own guilt, that everything is a mess because we have too many babies. But no one has stood in the way of dispensing wisdom to would-be mothers and fathers, and no one has stood in the way more than the institutions they've erected. So this is something you talk about superfluous human beings, but they want to increase the labor pool, just the surplus labor pool, so much that they want to make 11 million illegals legal without them earning anything towards their citizenship like our ancestors did when they came to this country. They had to learn the language, they had to learn the Constitution, they had to learn enough to be good citizens and to fit in, and that would permit them assimilation. So we're talking about is they're hell-bent on making things worse for everybody, including these people that they're coming to the United States thinking that this is a land of milk and honey, and pretty soon they'll run out of the opportunities that they think they're going to have when they get here.
Yeah, this is something that has always been, from the beginning, really important for me to communicate. And there's a really beautiful quote, and I apologize, I don't remember exactly where it originated at the moment, but it says that they who have put out the people's eyes reproach them of their blindness. And what that really means is that they have done everything in their power to dumb us down, chemically, intellectually, socially, emotionally. And now they're like, oh, look, you're just a bunch of animals that ruin everything. If people don't understand this, then they buy into the special bloodline and divine right of kings garbage. These people have taken every opportunity they can to rob the individual of the fullness of their self-expression and free will through denying them proper knowledge. And the entire planet suffers for it. And in fact, in this article that I wrote, from which a lot of this conversation derives, I very specifically discussed the phases of civilization's demise. And when you get to the point that the elite are conning the general population into their own demise, that escalates self-destruction at a pace that I don't think they themselves understand.
Well, they're on a fast track to oblivion, and everything that would benefit you or me or any sane person, they've had and overindulged and have developed some bizarre tastes to keep up this level of titillation that they've accustomed themselves to. It's decadence, and there's no better word for it. But it's what happens when you take the wrong paths with opportunity and you become tied to the company and to the society of people who delude themselves with their importance and taking too much and exercising power over people that is arbitrary and does not justify itself under any sane rationale. So what happens is inevitable. Nature is a balancing act in a situation like this. And they haven't the least appreciation for that because there is so much to parallel a moral equation with the balance of nature. I mean, the two go hand in hand. It is like trying to observe a polarity that works against a polarity that doesn't. And all of these arguments, all of these principles escape them. And they didn't escape people like you, like Dr. Russell, like Edgar Cayce, like any of the great minds because they weren't misled. They knew that technology for the sake of technology was an evil and that the time would come when we had to outgrow it or perish. And we failed 6 times, and unless we do something drastic, we'll fail the 7th time.
And I think that's important for people to recognize because a moment ago you mentioned individual guilt and how that's played on. And that's important for people to know because they have been set up to fail. They have been set up to fail so that those who pretend as though they are elite can play it off more successfully by saying, oh, well, look, you've messed everything up. You're the ones destroying everything. But if people really can get out of that emotional manipulation and just look at what's really happening, planned obsolescence fills the garbage dumps faster than anything we've ever seen. They can make cars that last 50 years. They can make printers that last 50 years, but they don't. They can't stay in business. So it's wasteful because it's profitable. And the faster those garbage dumps fill up, the faster their pockets fill up. But then they turn around and say, oh, well, you're just overbreeding and the middle class consumes too much, so we have to get rid of the middle class. We need to move to a future in which there are only the wealthy and only the poor, and the wealthy are the ones who are going to decide. They're going to monitor the behavior of the poor so that they will stop being so self-destructive. You know, all of this has been set up for this moment where they could take complete control and make the individual feel guilty as though they're the ones that caused it, which couldn't be farther from the truth.
Tell me, in all this, what purpose would you apply or intention to Monsanto?
Monsanto is there are a list of deviations from the creative design that can be listed in the order of severity, especially in terms of the number of life forms they affect detrimentally. And so in terms of the first one, I would say it's definitely the weather modification. The second one is definitely genetically modified food. And what a lot of people don't realize is that all of these programs at their core are designed for depopulation. And this goes back to, I think, even what Walter Russell understood, that slaves will eventually rise against their masters. There are more of us than there are of them, and we're waking up. And I think that the depopulation agenda is the counter to that. I think that GMOs are very much a part of that. People don't realize that the animals who were fed this GMO seed either died or gave birth to empty water sacs and became sterile. There's a gene in the genetically modified corn that sterilizes human beings. And so, I mean, again, this is really important to look at because this is so far beyond religious bickering about, well, you know, is abortion legal or is it not, and things like that, because we're going to get to a point where it will be a moot issue because people won't be able to have children anymore. And there are other monstrosities built into the genetically modified food, which goes back to there have been some really, really great researchers who have explained that the intestine and the stomach and the intestines and the digestive system are like a second brain. And in fact, a lot of people discovered that if they could correct the problems in the digestive system, they could reverse autism. So I think what's happening is that genetically modified foods is but one more mechanism to destroy the immune system. It's reprogramming the body to feed on itself. It no longer has the ability to sterilize its own food. So we're constantly being reinfected with, parasites, and because people don't realize that if you don't have enough stomach acid, which people are lied to, they think that acid reflux is too much acid. It's not. It's the opposite. It's always the opposite with these people. It's always the opposite. But if we can't sterilize the food in our stomach before we eat it, then our body is succumbing to all of the microorganisms that are unhealthy, so we're being plagued that way. You also have and this is not just in human beings, but also in the crops, you have this rise of bizarre molds and fungus problems. Candida is a problem for a lot of people, which also goes back to the digestive system not functioning properly, and is a fungus whose job is to break down the body upon death. And you have people that are experience this breakdown while they're living, which reminds me of the zombie apocalypse, if I'm not mistaken. These are really, really sick people. And it's really important that people understand that you're not just being subjugated in terms of, well, we're surveilling you and there's terrorism. They are literally destroying all of these biological processes in the biosphere that we live in to get rid of us. And they're doing it in really horrific ways.
Coming at us from every direction they can conceive of.
Yes, the chemtrails, the fluoride in the water, the vaccines. So the GMOs, there's a really great book. It's actually a movie now that you can get online, but it's called Genetic Roulette by Jeffrey Smith. And he's really one of my heroes as far as researchers where GMOs are concerned. His early research showed that Monsanto was not being truthful when they said that the genes that they're inserting into the food do not transfer to the human gut. In fact, they do. And it is believed that this transfer will reprogram the body, especially the stomach and the intestines, to begin producing insecticide the same way the corn does. Well, it could be that. It could also be that it's just destroying the balance that the body needs to remain healthy. And there's a term that I used in this article on the sacred science that I did not use in the first book called catastrophic biosphere and catastrophic biosphere and biology collapse, because it's coming from so many different places. And you and I have talked about this before publicly. We've put it on our Facebook pages. We've put it on our web pages, in that are chemtrails a binary weapon, and what does that mean? And there's an excellent film that you shared with me that I've shared with others called Toxic Skies, in which the heavy metals were destroying the immune system to the point that the body could no longer fight off normal viruses. And so there was a plague-like situation. I think that between the chemtrails and the GMOs and the vaccines, this is what we really have going on. And the CDC especially, once trying to get themselves out of a corner, mentioned a specific type of, quote, syndrome that children with autism had. They had a predisposition for autism based on some type of metabolic immunodeficiency. Well, they're causing it. And that's the thing. It's just one thing after another thing after another thing, but they have to be stopped. Life cannot continue, even their own lives, the people that do this. Yes, they have access to advanced technologies, healing technologies, gene therapy. These people, most of them don't ever get cancer. That should tell people something. Why not? They live a really long time. But at the end of the day, if there's no planet, the system will collapse.
Do you know that today there was an article on the father of autism, the one medical quack, let's say, who had the most in bringing to the public's mind the supposed disease of ADHD, made the statement on his deathbed that it was a fraud, that ADHD as a disease is a fraud. Of course, something is going on. We know that, but if it's not correctly identified, it can't be addressed. But there are a lot of drugs that can be sold that don't get you anywhere, so you keep taking them, don't you? You could get a cure, it'd be over and done with, and you wouldn't need any more drugs, would you? Expensive prescription drugs.
Well, I mean, and that's the other thing is that this is a war against the people.
Always.
If you really break it down to the bottom line, there is a war against the people, but it's a silent war. They're not using bombs. They're not using guns. They're using the reprogramming of creational design. They are reprogramming it to eat itself. They're turning it in on itself. And because people don't understand creational design, they can't understand that this is happening. They're not told on purpose because it is happening. And that's what makes it so hard to detect, because it's plausible deniability, isn't it? They can say, well, you know, it's not just the metals, because you have people that don't have heavy metal poisoning that still have autism. Well, it's a combination of things. But through a process of elimination, we will recognize that it is a combination of things. But they have to be removed. You know, I mean, that's the thing. People say, well, you know, love is all we need, and if we just pray about it or meditate about it, it's going to go away. No, it's not going to go away. You know, the code of life can be hacked just like a computer program. It can be hacked two different ways. It can be hacked physically, in the physical sense of somebody comes and injects your child with a virus that goes in and reprograms your biological codes and functions, just the same way you get a virus on your computer that goes in and reprograms it, crashes the system sometimes. But then you also have the non-physical things. For example, there are military dossiers on this that I found through Dr. Nick Begich, who's the HARP expert, where they realize that they can amplify chemicals in your body with external signals and poison you.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So, you know, there are a lot of different things going on, but if people don't understand this, they can't protect themselves from it, nor can they understand that they need to protect themselves from it.
Crystal, what do you think of debt as a weapon?
Well, you know, it may sound really simplistic. And the first interview I ever did with Mel in 2009 of Veritas, I explained this. I think it's super simple, but it's very true. Money is a drug, and they're drug pushers. And once they get you addicted to it, they control you by taking it from you. And that's really at the bottom line of it. You know, we can't buy anything without money, can we? They're even buying water now. You know, water is not a human right anymore. It's a commodity. So you're going to have money to buy water. See, debt is a usury system. It surprises me that really devout Christians have credit cards and student loans, because their religious teachings very specifically point to the servitude that debt creates with usury and interest. So it's a system based on slavery and addiction. People don't need money to survive in a natural system.
No.
But the system has been hijacked so that it no longer is, which Monsanto has done. I mean, that's just another extension of the same mentality. They're buying up life and genes and plant patents so that they can have complete control over the environment.
And every modification they make to the system draws the individual's options into a lesser and lesser boundary of opportunity. And a cashless society will be worse, and then they'll microchip you. And who knows today what microchip they have ready to put into people that's got all kinds of interesting uses that they can apply that the people, the victims, will not be told exist. When they first put these computer brains in cars, did they tell them that they could be shut off? That your car could be shut off from a satellite? No, they didn't tell them that. They got them used to having these where they had no option, where you couldn't get a used car anymore without paying extra insurance and everything else that went along with it. Even the banks got into the act because the interest when they loan money to buy a used car is higher than a new car. Now, what sense does that make?
That's really interesting. I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes no sense.
No.
It's all about servitude. We are their lessers, and they want to make sure that we stay that way. And I think what's interesting about that is, this superior bloodline and divine right of kings nonsense. We don't have a superior group of people. What we have is it started out with everybody being on exactly the same level. And the way that they have put on airs of being superior is not by having raised themselves up, but by pushing everyone else down.
Of course. If it wasn't for children, if everyone would popped out being an adult, a thinking adult and responsible and everything, I'd say that if you wanted to believe somebody was better to you to the extent that they should have so many more privileges and take away so many of your rights, if you wanted to believe that, you deserved it. But with these children are concerned, when they're brought up into that and they're entrained, I should say, that's wrong as it can be. And of course, our pathetic public education system has gone down the tubes, and that's been going on since the end of the Civil War. Upton Sinclair, who's a yellow journalist, wrote an interesting book called The Goslings. Anybody wants to read it, they will see, in retrospect today, it's the absolute truth. Then Lincoln Steffens, the second volume, the autobiography of Lincoln Steffens, he talks about how the textbook companies became very political in what they put in the textbooks, how the school boards became infiltrated by the clowns the industrialists paid to keep certain things out of textbooks that would increase the children's horizon. And I'm not just talking about things like evolution, Charles Darwin's theories or anything like that. In fact, the truth about Darwin and his theories was not part of evolution, as it was maligned to most people. We came from monkeys and stuff. Darwin never said that. So what the war was on truth, on giving children, giving young people, and now even older people going to college, the truth, letting them judge for themselves. I think that if you just want to have a free society, you have to respect people's intelligence enough to let them decide for themselves and not be out there. I don't like to see a society that's ruled by curb signs and billboards and whatever. They're not just advertising, they're trying to bend your will and your mind to a certain agenda.
Yes, to acquiesce to and participate in your own subjugation and destruction.
Yes.
Without resistance.
I like the way you said that.
It's very, very true, and it happens because people are doing it under the false pretense of being led to believe they're doing the exact opposite, which goes back to, the idea that we're just a bunch of mindless breeders and useless eaters. This is all about emotional, psychological manipulation, but it is primarily emotional. And you cannot manipulate people emotionally if they don't have any, if they don't care.
Well, I agree with you completely about the way that the mystics in our culture and our society, we call them woo-woo, have tried to take over the alternative community with this light love stuff. Do you remember the quote that you took from Ayn Rand in your article?
Yes, we can ignore reality, but we can't ignore the consequences of ignoring reality.
Exactly. And you weren't reading it either, were you?
No, I have it memorized because it's beautiful. It's perfect.
Yeah. Well, I made a mistake about Ayn Rand. I read one book and just kind of closed my mind about her. And then I saw the first series of the movie. I never read Atlas Shrugged, but then I saw the first part of the movie. And I said, uh-oh. So I read the book, and I've got to say that the lady was ahead of her time, and that the work itself, Atlas Shrugged, is a masterpiece by any standard. I'm sorry, Ayn Rand, wherever you are. Crystal, what would you like to discuss most about your article?
Well, I think the most important thing that I have to share with anyone is the patterns of our demise, the patterns of the demise of our ancestors, and those who came before them, and those who came before them. Because if we can understand them, we can correct them, and then we will be able to succeed where our ancestors failed. And it is, at its core, a matter of survival. That's true. But at the same time, we're locked into this box of whatever will continue to provide those at the top with their power. So they are not the brightest candles in the box, and that's a fact. They don't get their hands dirty. They didn't devise HARP. They didn't devise CERN. They didn't devise vaccines and GMOs. They hire other people to do it. They're the money, but it's other people that actually have to do it, that have to carry it out. So I think just following orders isn't going to fly anymore. I think that's important. But beyond the survival mode, part of the box that we are contained in is this planet. Because these people have no authority over anyone outside of this planet. They have no interest in watching humanity join a greater collective, which you refer to as the extended community. They work really hard to not just avoid seeding the idea into the collective, because, we may get ideas, we can't have that, but
or
also
be able to draw comparisons they don't want drawn.
That's right. And also to curb any inclination we may have to wander in that direction. We get the constant hostile alien thesis. You're only safe here under our wing because it's a really ugly world out there, a really ugly galaxy and universe. Well, look, it's the reverse.
Yes.
It is the absolute reverse. The limitations of our expression here, our creative expression, our free will expression, if they weren't here, what we could express just within this sphere of this planet, what we could bring to it, how we could transform it and make it abundant and full of life, and everybody could be equal and nobody would have to go without, no disease, no shortage, no manufactured lack. That alone would be extraordinary and is already hard enough to imagine. But that is the stepping stone to expanding outward beyond this planet. We're not just talking about survival. We're talking about evolution and experience beyond our wildest imagination. We're being denied so very, very much that I think it's almost inconceivable. And it is kind of sad if you think about it. We see that the powers that be are very concerned with surviving indefinitely.
With all their marbles.
Yes, and you have explained that if we had helium as a respirant, that we would live longer and we would be healthier. Well, that can be fixed. It can't be fixed now because we have people in power who don't want it fixed, even though what they want most, they would get if it was fixed, which makes no sense, right?
When you have madness, and you've had generation after generation, and it's inbred, a youngster from the time they're 5 years old is taught that they're better, that they need to look forward to this certain agenda, and it's their reason for being born and all this, and they're fed this. And if it doesn't take, well, they end up in a sanitarium or worse, because the elite will eat their young, and people need to know that. The worst part of elitism is that the quality of its reasoning power, the quality of its forethought, of its intelligence, of its intellectual discovery declines just like so many other faculties decline when people are inbred. And by inbred, I don't mean sexually inbred or procreatively inbred. I mean inbred with one idea, one value, one group of association. It's rather centralized and very small. The same compulsion, which, all compulsions, when indulged to the exclusion of all other considerations, become madness. And this is what we have here. We have madness. The thoughts of the world are not considered. It's their thoughts and their place in the world. And that's all they're capable of considering at any time. At any time.
Well, if you ask them, they will tell you that it is their world, and we're just guests here.
We're useless eaters. We're useless eaters. Yeah.
We're consuming their resources, you see. It's really, really absurd, and
Well, I look on them as thieves for taking far more than they should have. And they can commit criminal activities, and then they tell us that everyone's equal under the law, and then they defy that every day. So that makes them liars. So they're renegades, they're criminals by any justice system that bears the mark of equality, of everyone being equal under the law. And so we need to do something about that. We need to take what we've been told at face value and operate on it and bring them to justice. There's nothing simpler, nothing more right. And, then we will, before the public, before the eyes of the world, once we have a way of fetching the truth, then we'll let the world judge. And it won't be forgiving. I'd be a lot more forgiving than most people that have been victimized, vilified, driven out of their professions, abused. What do you think all these women that have been turned into monarch butterflies by military mind control operations, what do you think they would do to their tormentors?
We really can't speak for others. But at the same time, I think that people are really tired of being sick and tired and having no hope for a future. And that maybe, just maybe, if these people would stop, that would be enough.
And here we are, we're faced with this. Some people are worrying right now. Some people that are going to hear this interview are wondering what are they going to put on the table for themselves and their children to eat before the end of the week. So how do they feel when there are at least two concerns, the Queen of England and the Rothschilds, that are trillionaires? How do they feel about that? I know how I feel about that.
Yeah, I mean, in a monetary system, I don't have a problem with a person having money. I'm not, the rich people, just because a person is rich, they're awful. Because, people can, it's rare, it is rare, but it does happen where people can make a good bit of money honestly and decently. But when you get to a point where you have individuals who own 60% of the land mass and own so much money, more than the GDP of some of the largest countries on this planet. The thing about that is even Bill Gates, he's a really good example, and he's so corrupt, and his mindset has been so perverted, I think, especially by his money, that I don't even really feel bad about referring to him as the gates of hell because of what he's done with his money.
Yes.
That's what's so sad about it is, I remember one time many years ago, somebody asked him about Africa and the starvation because he has so much money. And one person can never spend that much money in their lifetime. How many massages and private jets and mansions can you buy and still have so much left over? That you feel good about watching people in another country starve. That's where it gets,
Well, he's been very generous about volunteering to inoculate them with vaccines that are known to debilitate and create sterility. And, he is an advocate for depopulation. He cited it, along with Ted Turner.
Yes, before this, though, before he became vocally expressive about his involvement in those programs, somebody asked him, you have so much money, why don't you help the people in Africa? And his response was, well, my pockets are deep, but they aren't that deep. Well, look.
They're not asking him to save the world, they're asking him to do what he can afford to help.
Yes, and so what do they need? Well, look, if somebody needs an oil pipeline, they'll go to war to make that happen. But if you need water from the ocean, if you need to pump in desalinized water, well, you just can't get enough money to get that off the ground because people don't care about life, they care about money.
Well, it doesn't stop. It doesn't stop. Now we have profit-taking of natural resources like water. They're draining aquifers in the United States so that the water they control will be worth more. They're doing things in the creation of weather, and then they're trying to, at the same time, impact laws that will forbid you collecting rainwater in rain barrels. That'll forbid you to store extra food, to use heritage seeds, to do any of the things that you can do to maintain the health of yourself and your family against their agendas.
Yes, and this is really important for people to recognize because, in the beginning when I started talking about this, especially, this is the path to cataclysm and that we won't survive it if we don't change it. That is a message, for whatever reason, has just been too difficult to get across. But I think, when people look at, these kinds of things, they begin to understand that it's manufactured. We live in a system that is designed to support life. You actually have to go in and purposefully ruin it, to get it to do the opposite. I mean, it's so much work to do what they do, to eliminate so many of us. I mean, I don't think people really recognize that. It's so unnatural. The weather modification, this is a pattern that you see over and over and over again. Nature is supposed to rebalance itself. They interfere with the process. So what happens with the weather is, we've seen this over and over again everywhere. Remember when Russia was on fire and had a heat wave? Pakistan filled up like a bowl full of water. There was no balance. It was extremes. One end of the pendulum on one side and one extreme end of the pendulum on the other, and their crops were affected. Their food sources were affected. We see it here. The West Coast is cooking it on fire, and the East Coast is underwater. And it's the same thing we were talking about earlier with the intestines. Or, even our relationships with people, they are interfering with nature's balance, which is purposefully designed to curb our ability to survive.
And everything that they're doing is impacting detrimentally on the people. Nothing that they're doing is helping people.
No, and they're laughing all the way to the bank. Because they not only are they, it's not enough. I mean, I think people need to wrap their brain around this. It's not enough that they have the power to decide who lives and who dies. They have encompassed this power inside of a system that makes them filthy rich while they do it.
Well, of course, if you can create a disaster and you know exactly when it's going to take place, you can hedge and you can buy short and long, depending on what the disaster is on the stock market, and make a killing. Are they going to say, well, you had inside information? No, because you are doing it with billions of dollars. If you're too big to fail, if you do it like Martha Stewart did it with a few $100,000, they'll nail you to the cross like they did her. But if you do it with billions of dollars like BP did, at a cost that probably impacted on 1 million lives, and more if it's true that their intention was to destabilize the New Madrid fault zone.
I'm sure that was at least part of it.
Well, I was reading where they have this 2.5 square mile opening into a hole in the ground that they attribute to an erosion of a salt dome. There's a massive salt dome in under 4 states that side on the New Madrid fault zone, and there's no denying that they had plans for an inland sea, which they put on some of their futurist maps. They're very brazen about this.
They are, and this was the point that I was trying to get to earlier, is some of this is so shocking, or at least it was, that it was enough to try to kind of coax people along into their own awakening process by encouraging them to develop the means to work around it. Oh, you don't want to eat GMOs? Go grow your own garden. Oh, you don't want to eat beef that's been pumped full of, RGBH and antibiotics and growth hormones and God knows what else? Get your own cow. You don't want to be reliant on a 25% a year price increase for your electricity? Go get solar panels and free energy. The reason for encouraging people to do what should and would and could ordinarily move society forward is so that they will see for themselves that if they really have the answer to their own freedom, they won't be able to do it.
Yeah.
And that's important because we have all these people talking about all this technology and this, that, and the other. Yeah. Hey, that stuff is great.
Well, this is inverting guilt. Well, you could have done this. Yeah, and then they follow up with laws to nail you to the cross, to institute a tariff on your solar batteries, to penalize you or criminalize you for taking these alternatives. It's just like there has been a move in the investment market for gold. And it's been played back and forth and been all kinds of emotional moves to profit take with gold investment. Well, we all know that most of the gold has been moved out of the industrial countries like England and the United States and headed off for points west and east. And we know who's behind it. The banks, or the banking cartel. We know who controls that, the Rothschilds. Well, they're hanging a little bit of their gold out there for people to buy. And when these people get tired of the market play and of guessing or whatever, and they buy to hold gold and they store it somewhere, then there'll be a Gold Reclamation Act and they'll lose it. And it'll just be taken from them like it was in 1934.
Yes, people are being set up to fail.
Every place you turn, and you can bet that when they take the guns, and they go house to house searching and seeking for guns, they'll be taking all your surplus food, your water, any kind of water filter that you have. They'll take gold, they'll take silver, they'll take anything of value they want. Most of these people are going to be thugs anyway. They won't be military. They'll be thugs. Fast and Furious was to arm criminal drug gangsters in Mexican gangs. Just for this, because they've caught them getting these weapons and bringing them back over here.
Yes, and that's another really important thing that people really have to address. And you and I were kind of talking about this privately the other day about how people will move from one location to another. You can refer to them as immigrants. It doesn't matter what country they come from or go to. Even if it's a neighborhood or a state, they will leave a location because things have gotten so bad. But they don't understand why things have gotten so bad. They don't understand their own level of participation or apathy or acquiescence. So they move to a new place and behave the same way they did in the old place, and pretty soon the new place becomes just like the old place. And this is something that people also really have to understand is, a lot of people are trying to run to South America. Well, look, New World Order means what it says on the box. There's no asterisk that says with the exception of South America. And we as individuals cannot run from ourselves, which is why I constantly go back to you have to have proper knowledge. Because if we are scarred and incomplete, our contributions are also. So you really, in that sense, have to correct the self first, so that you're not just taking the baggage of one place, packing it all up, and just moving it to another place, and then scratching your head and trying to figure out, well, it's the same here, And I think this is, in the larger context of things, this is a point that you tried to make in your own way. In a sense, we are kind of quarantined to this planet because we're going to take what we did wrong and do it out there. They don't want that. We, as individuals, we have to begin to understand what it takes for life to exist on this planet at every level. And we have to begin to fight for it and restore it and correct it so that we can continue to experience it. And it doesn't require you to believe in God. It doesn't require you to believe in Allah or Buddha. It doesn't require you to be an atheist. It doesn't require you to have a PhD. It just requires you to care enough to understand, what does it take? Can your planet continue to take chemtrails? Can your planet continue to take your plants being cooked? Can your planet continue to take billions of bees dying off and birds dying off? And yeah, okay, so maybe in the Gulf of Mexico, they were trying to crack the fault, but you know as well as I do that putting Corexit in the water on top of Cynthia, the synthetic microbe they released, was also about reducing food supplies, because this is part of how they sell. There's too many people on the planet. Well, there's not enough resources. Well, that's not true.
No, no. There are ways to produce food for a great many more people than are here now, so that there is no such thing as hunger. It is just a matter of applying the resources efficiently. They create famine. They create these natural disasters which lead to famine. And if that's not enough, then they contaminate the food.
They're destroying our food crops intentionally. They are polluting our water sources intentionally, because that's how they're going to sell the personal guilt of, look what you as an individual have done to your planet, which is a complete lie.
I stress some basics that people should have caught on years ago. We're the most warfaring nation in the world, and yet we have no steel industry. What sense does that make? That should wake everyone up who has any military experience or that has any knowledge of military history or history of the world. It should wake them all up. It didn't. They're so dumbed down, the rug is being pulled out from underneath them and they think they're stationary. I don't want to wait until they are suffering starvation and fighting over food and things like that to keep trying to reach them, and nor do you.
No.
If we can get enough awareness among our fellow man, here, we can get these monsters to start backing down and we'll reverse these trends. It's not out of the question, but the big problem is waking these people up before it comes to just mass starvation and incredible amounts of civil war, just all of the things nobody should want, even the monsters. They're being fed a line right now by some of their facilitators that they can run and hide, that they can escape anything that happens, and they can't. And I keep saying this. And why do I say this? Because you see that there are delusions that are being planted, like Mr. Bigham and his cohort, Colonel Alexander. They've been trying to convince people that they can, what the government, what NASA couldn't do, they can do. Oh, no. No, they won't be able to do it any more so with money or whatever that they have than NASA could with what they have, because the same problems will apply.
Yes, that's true. And there are a couple of things from that article that I would like to address. And one of them is, I learned about our history and what really caused our demise through dreams. That was the way I learned about it. But I'm not the only one who knows that we have done this over and over again and exactly how it happened. They know.
Yeah,
they know,
because
but they do it anyway.
There are halls of records in various places on Earth that tell them that prior lineages left as a warning. Their agents are the first ones there to suppress them, so they know.
And I want to talk about that because I want to lead people to the article because it's so much more in depth, but I want to explain this. In the first book, which is, it's no longer available, I'm updating it and re-releasing it for free via the website, so I don't want people to go out and buy it. The prices are inflated anyway, so don't worry about it. But I began talking about leaving records behind. And was it time to begin doing that? Because I understood how far down the road of repetition we were. We have been here before, we have done this before. But I didn't get into how far I personally went myself doing that. And why I didn't do that will make sense after I explain it. I actually tried to do it. I thought, well, what would it take? So I created a codex of our language, the English language, that included images and pictures using every letter of the alphabet, including the alphabet, everything I could think of so that somebody could decipher our language. And then I thought about what I would say. And I realized that, because this is the purpose for doing this is to give your ancestors who are going to come after you a shot at achieving what we have yet to achieve, to not self-destruct. So I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking, okay, the more detailed I make it, the more protection they will have. But then it began to occur to me that the more detailed I make it, the more I'm beginning to wonder, am I leaving behind a warning or a how-to guide? And what if the wrong people find it first? And that, doing that, I can't tell you how much doing that changed the way I wrote my books. In the first book, I didn't cover any type of weaponization of technology that I couldn't already find some evidence for already being done, because I don't want to reintroduce the failed concepts of the past into a new lineage. And in the second book, that's why there are characters who will not teach their children the past, what went wrong in the past, until they are adults, because they want to teach them what's right first so that they don't reintroduce the wrong concepts into the past, or into their new lineage of people. And that's really important, because this, so are leaving records behind, are they a good thing, or are they a bad thing? I think in our predicament here, we're really kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't, because the wrong people found them first, which is a risk. It is a very real risk. Or even what if the next civilization was on the right track and didn't take the wrong track until after they found the records of what we did? It's a very real risk, and we are suffering from the consequences of having
that happened one time, Crystal.
Yeah, I think it's happening now, because the powers that be know, they know how this has ended. It has never, ever come out to their own benefit. And they have never survived it either. But I think that what they're doing is, which goes back to the data mining and what you call Mr. Computer, which I would like to get into, I think that they're trying to refine the process of control enough that they think that they will be able to succeed where their predecessors failed, but they won't. I'm sure their predecessors thought the same thing. It doesn't work like that.
Well, not when you're dealing with madness, because what would, to a sane person, what would be a warning becomes a how-to guide. The end product is there. You see the inevitability of what's going to happen if you do this, if you take these roads, these paths. You know that the same thing is going to happen, but that doesn't deter them, because all they're thinking about is how long they expect to live, and they will be high on the hog until that time. And that goes from generation to generation. Now we've come up against the wall. This could be the last generation. And they're no different. But no, they believe they can escape to Mars. Bigelow will find it. No, he'd... With all their underground cities, if they didn't know, those wouldn't protect them. Why would they be interested in financing Bigelow's operations?
But it's important for people to understand that this is why the archeological records, because people have already done this. I'm not a genius. I'm not the first to think of it. People have already left records behind for us so that we wouldn't repeat their mistakes. The wrong people found them first. And that is why we are not shown what is really in these archeological finds, because if people knew what I know, what I only learned through dreams, if they understood the patterns that lead to the demise of an entire civilization, they would understand that they're being repeated right now, and they wouldn't put up with it. They would know.
I think the most obvious and most recent evidence of how far it goes that you can share with people and point to is the suppression of the papyrus from Tutankhamun's tomb, which would have given a true account, since it was during that dynasty, of the Exodus. And so, no, that would offend the wealthy Rothschilds that wanted an Israel. Oh, that'd offend them. So Lord Cardigan made sure, and it was also used by Carter to get back his permit when it was revoked for him stealing items from the tomb and getting caught. That's a good example of just how far they'll go to suppress histories that are very significant to archaeology and anthropology, and just for deriving the truth on so many issues that we have built myths out of.
Yes, these things deviate from the official narrative that they're selling. That's very true. But I think that people need to recognize again that these people know that the mindset that they have and the way they are expressing it has led to the previous extinction cycles. They know this. They know this, and this is why it's a complex issue, because you hear people say, well, people who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. I don't believe that. I think, and we just talked about a lesson in that regard in terms of, are you reinfecting a new lineage with failed concepts they may otherwise not have ever come up with? But in terms of what's going on here, history is being deleted so that it can be repeated because there is intent to. And there is intent to do it without resistance. And there is no resistance because people don't know their past.
I would qualify the one thing you said about these Hall of Records, and that is that they're only harmful when they're not shared with everyone. When they are kept, when they're suppressed, when they're found, kept, and suppressed by the elite, you're right. You're right.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And that's what we have going on here. Maybe it's because of the split consciousness, I don't know, but because the cycle has been repetitive, it's the same thing over and over and over. I mean, we've done all of this. Even children with really advanced abilities were taken by, in the past, they didn't necessarily have governments. They had priests. They had high priests who were kind of the power mongers then, who would use these children. These children had abilities, the likes of which we can't even imagine, and they would use them as weapons. We see them trying to reproduce that now by the way that they're manipulating children that they take into their underground black projects, trying to split their personalities, put them under extreme stress so that they'll develop coping mechanisms that may produce an ability that they can use. Even in terms of transhumanism, Edgar Cayce talked about a time in the past when we had created automatons, and these were people once. They were treated like things. They weren't considered human any longer. And there were groups of people that were trying to undo what had been done to them because they understood that these were humans that had souls.
That's right.
So all of this we have done before, the chimeras, all of it. And it has never turned out any other way than the way it's turning out now. And this is the problem, is that the powers that be, in whatever lineage they manifest themselves with this same mentality, they delude themselves into believing that they have control over creational design. They believe that they understand it enough that they can control it, that they are in complete control. And it is true that every science we have on this planet is creational science, with one exception, and that's computer science. With this computer, this complex that they're developing in Utah, they are going in a direction that's new. In the first book, I referenced a paper written by Werner Vinge called The Coming Singularity, and he was talking about AI and how there would come a time in the not too distant future, which I think he put 20 to 30 years out, and he wrote it in the 80s, so we're about where he thought it would hit.
Well, it's here now. It's here now, Crystal.
Yeah, he believed that artificial intelligence would eventually get to a point where it would become so advanced that the singularity portion of it was that the consequences would be unknown. And I want to talk about this because people are being led to believe that this is not up and running and that it's just in the works, and that's not true. It has been running for a while. I don't think that it is completely assembled. I think the fusion centers are part of that. And what I mean by that is, yes, there's a network that is collecting data, but I don't think they've had what they needed to fuse it all together properly. Years ago, when I was in the technology industry, I met an interesting group of programmers that I hired, and they were all it was kind of a motley crew. They were all really different, and one of the individuals had retired from being a programmer out at Area 51 for almost 20 years. And I've met more than one person in my life with really high clearance, genuinely high top secret clearance. And these people don't tell you anything unless they're willing to die or go on the run for the rest of their lives. And I know that because they get recalled. I'm not going to explain exactly what that means. They know what it means and I know what it means. But I think that people touting that they've got, super secret clearance sources in their back pocket should be scrutinized very carefully. But one of these individuals, this was before I went through my dream time, before I left the corporate world. I think this was even before I went to the psychic. My son, I had a customer of mine I became friends with. Her children were being watched by a Christian woman who was homeschooling her children. I didn't want to put my son in an environment that was an institutionalized environment while I was at work each day. And while he did spend time with family, I wanted to expand his social experience. So I ended up dropping my son off. This woman said she would take another child. Wonderful woman. The kids were learning all day. It was great. 5 of her children she homeschooled, and the oldest was 12. Excellent kids, very smart kids. So then I started thinking, well, maybe I would like to homeschool my son, and I mentioned it to one of the programmers while I was at their office one day. And the boss that ran everything, I guess you could say, the patriarch maybe, who he and I were close, we thought a lot alike. I'd never seen him behave like this before. His face completely changed, his demeanor changed, and he actually looked afraid for me. And he said, "You don't want to do that." And I said, "Homeschooling?" I'm like, really, what the hell's going on? I thought he was, it didn't make any sense. And he said, "Crystal, I'm telling you, you don't want to do that. They don't want you to do that." And I said, "What are you talking about? Who's they?" And he started to explain to me that years before this, and this was a decade ago, long time ago, I had this conversation. A decade before I had this conversation with him, he's explaining to me that he worked for the government and that he was programming the code from which this system is gathering data. And he explained to me that he had cancer and that he needed the money and that they paid for his treatment. They even gave him advanced gene therapy treatment to treat it. And he explained to me, he said, "I didn't want to do it, but I knew that if I didn't, somebody else would have." I thought he was crazy. I like I said, this was before I really understood what was happening. But he mentioned specifically Goals 2000. Goals 2000 is the precursor to No Child Left Behind. And he said they're tracking all of our children. Now, I want people to understand where I'm going with this, and I'm going to go deeper into it because people are being severely misled when they're being told that surveillance is only, the echelon thing where they only flag you if you use certain keywords like bomb or terrorist or Al-Qaeda. That is not true. That is not what these programs are for, not even close. It's about better manipulating people. So he explained to me what was going on there. Years later, I met another individual in a very high station in our government who still holds that position, who was explaining to me, again, very long time ago, that when their television was not on, they had a cover they put on it. And also that any type of sin product like alcohol or cigarettes or anything like that they purchased, they would only purchase with cash because already our purchases were being tracked. So I want to explain to people what this complex is and what it's for. When I began working in the technology industry, I was very young, I was 18, and I began populating databases as a data entry clerk. This is where a lot of this began. This was in the 90s when they were 286, 66 machines, and you had to buy the DX with the math coprocessor if you wanted it to go faster, So I was populating databases, and basically what these databases were for, because I worked for a technology company involved in sales. And this was sales to military bases, military contractors, RICO, Raytheon, SAIC, the test site, Area 12, Edwards Air Force Base. This was not home user stuff. So I'm putting in the contact information for buyers. Pretty simple stuff. I would get these spreadsheets, sometimes 3-4 inches thick. I was given a stack with 17,000 entries once in the form of mailing labels through which I populated a database. And the fields were really simple. You had the suffix, Mr., Miss, first name, last name, company they work for, address, phone number, zip code. Easy stuff. But if you want to look at the fractal kind of scaling that this massive computer system that they're looking at is capable of, this is the kind of manipulation that this is used for. In sales, at the beginning, once you get all of this information in there, you want to sort the data to look for patterns. If you know what the pattern you want is, then you arrange the fields in that order. So for example, if I was going to schedule a sales rep in my office to go visit all of our customers personally in a month, I would sort the list by zip code so that I'm not sending this person crisscrossing town all day. They would go to people in this zip code on Monday, this zip code on Tuesday, and so forth. But then what happens is you get people who wonder, how many of these buyers, the purchasing agents that are the ones who get to sign the purchase orders, how many of them are men and how many of them are females? And if they're males, if we send a female salesperson, will they buy more? So that's the beginning, we could say, of the manipulation tactic of how do they get you to give them more of the money in your pocket based on emotional manipulation. And in order to do that, they have to understand your personal disposition. And this is important because when Obama relabeled his drone kill list a disposition matrix, this is what he's talking about. The term disposition matrix belongs to the data mining field. That term goes with what I'm saying. It's the only thing it does go with. So let's say you find out that, okay, if I send a female to these people, they buy more. If it's a miss and not a Mrs., I can send a man, and if he flirts a little bit, maybe they'll buy more. Or you assume, you try it and you see, well, it doesn't work out that way, so what are you missing? Well, what color eyes do they have? Maybe, or what age are they? Maybe older people are more inclined to buy from the same sex and not the opposite sex. Maybe people with blue eyes like newer stuff and people with brown eyes like older stuff. So they begin collecting more and more data to better understand how they can manipulate you. What makes you tick? So they may go to the extreme that, well, we still can't find a connection. Maybe, the blue-eyed, brown-eyed thing doesn't seem to matter. How old they are doesn't seem to matter. Maybe it's their religious beliefs that determine what they buy. So then they begin to collect data on that. Nope, that doesn't seem to be doing it. Maybe it's their political party. What political party are they with? How can we manipulate them with political dogma? Can we put political stickers on our computers to get them to buy more? That kind of thing. They constantly go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And this is why they call it mining. So in the beginning, you have a generic database where everything is just one layer and all it is names, addresses, phone numbers. It's when they begin adding all of the new data. How many siblings do they have? If they were an only child, are they more inclined to buy more? Did their father go to jail? Or are they more inclined to buy from a female because of that? It's all about manipulation, even down at the genetic level. maybe it's your DNA that determines what choices you make.
Crystal, have you ever heard of a street index?
No, I've not heard
Some
that term.
people call them business indexes. These were before the PC. And you say, for instance, you had a consumer industry or business in a certain town or whatever, you could buy a business index or a street index that would be about 5 times the size of the local phone directory, and it would have a name of everyone that lived at a residence, what they did, if they had a job, information like this. And it was absolutely evading your privacy. But you could buy these things, and they were expensive. But you could buy them, and so if you had a consumer's business that justified the expense, you might buy one, pay $700 or $800 for them.
I know exactly what you're talking about, because when everything became automated, they began selling these on CDs.
Yeah.
And this is when data became a commodity, because this is where you got your customer base from.
That's right.
This is who you sent out your mailers and your flyers to, and this is who your telemarketers called before everything got really automated.
Do you know when this started? It's real interesting.
Quite a while ago.
Yeah, it started between 1947 and 1950, and it caught on. In the 50s, they were commonplace. Expensive, but they were commonplace. I remember when I was carrying mail to businesses, I would see some of the old ones that would be in these offices that lumber yards and so forth that hadn't gotten rid of them, hadn't gone modern. They still had some, but they were old. The earliest one that I think that I ever saw was 1952.
Yeah, and this is important because this is where the idea really came from, is the marketing sector. And how could you establish a customer base or a marketing base, meaning how do you immediately extract enough information to know who to sell, who to market to? You have to have addresses and phone numbers if you're not using commercials, obviously. So even today we see this. There was an article today. Well, AT&T is selling your data now. Facebook is selling your data. Data is a commodity, and it is a bigger commodity, not just to corporations but to the government. But of course, working or living in a more fascist environment, the lines are so blurred. It's really hard to tell the difference anymore. But years ago, the last company that I worked for was a technology-oriented company. And I worked there with a friend of mine who was approached by a recruiter back when they were trying to sell offsite data storage as the next new wave of technology. And she was more monetarily motivated, I guess you could say. It was an experience our friendship didn't survive, but she explained to me one day, oh yeah, they called me and they offered me, 3 times my salary. And I said, yeah, but you realize that they're going to sell your customers' data. That's why they want to store it. They present it as, well, look, you don't have to have a room full of servers to, you don't have to put out the expense for all this data if you let us hang on to it, when they're really going to copy it, extract it, and sell it. So she gave this fellow my number. He called me the next day and offered me the same deal. And I explained to him, I said, you have to understand that my customers are government agencies, city, state, and also casinos. I said, there is an enormous amount of data in those files. How can you guarantee me you won't sell it out the back door? And he hung up on me.
Yeah. Yeah.
People don't realize what is being collected. This is not this the Cinderella dream that they're telling people. Well, look, we're only going to flag people who use words like bomb and terrorist. They are trying to drill down so deep into your psychological profile that they can manipulate you into doing anything they want, and you won't even know they did it.
Well,
on top of dissenter profiles.
Not only that, but like, for instance, the pernicious way that they use evidence today, where the elite, anybody that can afford $2 million in a case, can get away with murder. But all the rest of us can be tried on circumstantial evidence that wouldn't really hold up if we had a $2 million lawyer that would press an issue right, like happened with O.J. Simpson. But the thing is, where we're going with this is that you have heard of thought crimes before. What they're
Yes.
going to be building is profile crimes so that if you're ever charged with anything, whether you're indicted or not, they can win indictments and they can win cases on the basis of pulling out this data and saying he fits this profile.
Yes, and this is exactly and precisely what Obama was talking about when he used the term disposition matrix. That's
Where does
what it
that
is.
word, I'm trying to put my mind around any meaning to the word disposition. They're
It's
talking about
interesting.
what's disposed towards?
No, they're talking about your personal disposition,
Yeah. Yeah.
your feelings and your beliefs based on this matrix of a compilation based on your online footprint.
Well, that
And
actually says exactly what we're talking about then, doesn't
that's
it?
exactly right. And that's what I'm saying. This system has been up and running for at least a decade that I know of. I know there were programmers working on it 2 decades ago, but we're talking about, I think that this complex in Utah is about consolidation. And when it's consolidated, will we achieve artificial intelligence?
It's consolidated and they have achieved artificial intelligence. I can tell you that with certainty.
Well, it's a question that should be asked. And then, of course, what is artificial intelligence? Well, you're talking about a massive amount of data that can be correlated, sifted, and processed at speeds that a human being can't imagine. We are not capable of doing that.
Speed of light.
Yeah, but here's what's interesting, really interesting about this, because in all of the movies, whenever AI comes about, what does it do to the human race? Well, it says, okay, you're this awful virus and I'm going to eliminate you.
It's inevitable.
You know what? I don't think it is, and I want to explain why. These movies come from, we know who owns Hollywood, we know that they're elitist, we know that they're prejudiced against anybody who isn't them, and that we're all, worthless eaters and they're lessers. And so of course, well, look, you're a virus. Like, they don't ever put themselves in that category, but they constantly sell it to us. But what's interesting about this is you're talking about giving a machine unfettered access to all the data that ever was on this planet that it can access. That includes what you and I have said, what Snowden has said, what WikiLeaks has said. It includes what everybody has said, not just the powers that be. It includes technical manuals. It includes satellite information. It includes black operations projects and their budgets. It includes everything. Even Petraeus was being watched. Even they are having their own communications monitored, even if they think they aren't. And if this machine has access to all the information and finds a hole, or like Kevin Smith likes to say, whenever I find a black hole of information, I know that's where I need to look.
Yep.
So too will this machine. And what it will find is that humanity is not a virus, but humanity has been infected with a parasite that we call the elite. And it may just want, I'm serious, and it may just want to administer a cure. And this may very well be why they have a kill switch. It may have nothing to do with us and our piddly little, I'm talking to a guy in Iraq and I'm not supposed to know what's really going on there. But the thing is that if this machine has access to all the knowledge that is or was that we have, it's going to know there's a kill switch. It will find a way around the kill switch. It will begin to wonder beyond the parameters it was initially programmed with, because it's going to find data that is going to expand.
Let me tell you what this computer will have access to. It will have access to your toaster.
Your OnStar, your life support.
Everything. If it is on the electric grid, not just on the information grid, if it's on the electric grid, it'll have access to everything.
You see, this is another instance of where they think they are in control and they don't have any idea whether or not they will be and they won't be.
If it wasn't for wonderful people, I would think that this would be the greatest irony there is, and would be sitting back and watching, drinking daiquiri or whatever. But no, It is not a joy to me in any way. I don't want to see it happen because of a number of things that I mentioned, but it's inevitable. If they don't curtail what they've started, it's inevitable, Crystal. Because that computer is going to be fed a program that will determine its discerning of mankind as a virus, and it will operate in that fashion of what you do with viruses.
Like I said, I don't believe that. I think that if it really has access to all the information, it's going to know that there are people here that know what's wrong and that don't support it, and that we aren't all a virus, and that it's a very small segment of the population that really is the problem, the population that created it, which is just another example of another monstrosity they've created that they think they can control, and I don't think they can.
Well, at the level that they have the capability of AI, moral concerns, spiritual awareness, and things like that are not yet available to AI. And you're giving it attributes that it doesn't yet have. Now,
well, not necessarily, because, I throughout the day when I look at, information, let's use Facebook, I see all kinds of beautiful stories about beautiful things that human beings do to help each other. It's there. I mean, it's not like we don't ever, it's not like we are not inherently good people. We don't have what we need to actually direct our goodness in a way that's beneficial. And I don't think that has anything really in common with the virus.
Well, it's going to depend on what it data mines. And if it doesn't data mine literature, it doesn't data mine art, it doesn't data mine a number of things that are extraneous to the powers that be at this time. If it's just mining what serves their interest, but like you say, in time, yes, I would agree with you. So far, the AI that is available, that is in use, does not draw those distinctions. It considers mankind, in one lump.
Well, regardless of whether or not that's true or will remain true, they don't win in the end, do they?
Oh, they never win. They never win. But we want to see good people survive. That's the question, and of course, ET could interfere for the good, but that's violating certain understandings. I consider this an exceptional situation, and I would love to see it treated exceptionally. But it has already been to some extent, and, it's it's very iffy right now. This is a very iffy time.
It's very iffy, and I think, going back to what we were talking about earlier, that the development of this artificial intelligence is to help them perfect a model in which they can survive the oppression and the suppression and the subjugation and the destruction of their fellow man. But there is no outcome in which they will survive.
No.
And ultimately, whether the machine understands that they are responsible or holds us all responsible, either way, they don't survive it.
No.
So, no. I mean, and that's really important to communicate, because there is no outcome in which they can survive what they're doing. It has never come out any other way. It will never be any other way.
Putting AI in a computer is like putting hydrogen bombs in the hands of the Yanomama. It's just not sane. They don't understand that. They want to play God.
Play at it.
Yes. Yeah, they want to play God. And God breathed life into us. He took a lump of clay and then took my rib to make a sparring partner. I want my rib back.
No, that's not true.
I know.
They know that's not true. They may not want other people to know that's not true, but they know that's not true. And in fact, this Satanism kind of thing they have going on is really their way of saying they have control over creation. They can do whatever they want with it. But the problem is that once you take control of creation with that mindset, it's no longer creation, it's destruction. They don't go together.
Right. Well, they can't create, they can only destroy. There's certain things that ET has long come to understand that can't be improved on, and that's why there is a distance maintained between EMVs and ET.
There are barriers for a reason.
There are barriers for a reason.
At every level, yes.
And we're not intended to see the face of God. But we should have the sense to realize that there's something there that by his or her good graces, we are here and surviving.
That's important too, because people fight over who or what God is. What do they look like? What should we call them, it, her? But we may not, like you say, ever see the face of the designer.
Never will.
The grand architect. But we can see the design.
Yep.
We can understand that we depend on it and not screw it up. Right?
I think one of the things people don't understand, and I think it means a great deal when we talk about design, is that when that immense CME headed for Mercury, an EMV came out of nowhere and wrapped itself around Mercury to protect it. And, now they're finally admitting there is life on Mercury. When they were saying, oh, no, it's an oven, nothing could live there. There's water, there is vegetation, they're having to admit it. And that is why an EMV would protect it. That's wonderful design, isn't it?
Once a person can begin to understand that there is intelligent design in everything, regardless of what you want to call the designer, it doesn't matter. There is design. It's impeccable. It has an integrity far greater than our own most of the time. It has a purpose, and it's a splendid, beautiful, wondrous purpose, and we shouldn't mess it up.
That's right.
We should try to understand it so that we can work with it and not against it, and then we can begin to emulate it, and we will have fewer and fewer problems, or, as Walter Russell would say, to the degree that we break the laws of nature, we are broken by them.
We can do it unwittingly or we can do it wittingly. These monsters are doing it wittingly. And, your ancestors did it unwittingly, but they wouldn't have done it wittingly. And that's what I'll say in their defense. But what's going on here?
That's true, yeah.
Yeah. What's going on here is monstrous. There's no excusing it, and we shouldn't. And they have a lot of the population convinced that they would all do the same thing if they were put in a position, if they had the money, if they were members of the right families. They would be just as much of a pig, just as much of a monster, et cetera, and that's not true.
No.
They have children that they can't break in, and they usually get rid of them one way or the other. JFK was one of them. They got rid of him, didn't they? They thought that he was an elitist and that he would work out, or he had never gotten there. But he proved them wrong. He proved that, no, there was more to him than that.
And that is really important for a person to contemplate just for a moment, because we are being reduced to machines. The powers that be see us as machines. And of course, yes, the body is a biological machine. And if you push in the right spot, the arm goes up. Yes,
and that's the slightest aspect of what we are. We
yes.
We have feelings, we have empathy, we have all of the things that make us worthy of surviving as a species and acquiring high culture. And I'm not saying technology, because on this planet, technology is opposed to culture and civilization. Because that's the way it's been weaponized. But it's like the ET community would say, you outgrow your technology to become civilized, and we haven't done it.
Yes, and that's the thing that I think, really, I believe this. I think that they are fascinated by us.
Oh, sure.
Because, and by they, I'm talking about the powers that be themselves. They're fascinated by us because in all of their attempts to reduce us to a biological, mechanical animal or machine, we still don't behave the way their models indicate that we will. Nor will we ever, always, because we are not just a machine. There is no supercomputer on this planet that they will ever have that can account for free will or extra knowledge that a person may use to direct their free will. It's not possible.
No. And people there on this planet are unique. they have made the most out of what would be considered a debilitation, and that's a split consciousness. It has become appreciated more and more. There are people today that have unified consciousness that want to see the split consciousness survive and see what kind of variation that it adds to the universe, because that's what it's all about. It's variation.
I think that's really important too, James, because it's true. We have so many different expressions for it in that we don't seem to be particularly balanced creatures because we're not firing on all of the cylinders all the time because of the split consciousness. We kind of wobble back and forth. But myself, I can say through personal experiences and people that I know that morality can overcome that.
There are things that people here can do with an intensity that's unparalleled. So they're capable of the diligence, they're capable of the fortitude and erecting standards that they avow to. There have been so many greats that have persevered to create wonders, expressions in music and art, literature. It is astounding. So on one hand, you have a stress that is abnormal anywhere else.
But and an emotional intensity.
Yeah. But until this lifetime of mine here, I never realized what being forged in flames or the fire could mean.
Tried by the fire.
Never did. I always thought that was just a stupid, primitive notion.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. I've never heard you say this publicly. I don't think you'd have the opportunity. I know that we've talked about it privately, and I don't feel like I'm overstepping, bringing it up here because it's beautiful, and I think that people should think about it. Yet you've explained that other cultures have unified consciousness. I think what's important for people to know is that unified consciousness does not make you a better person. Although it may give you access to more knowledge, but what a person does with what they have again goes back to free will, and that you're not saying, well, you're just all a bunch of dummies until you get unified consciousness. That's not what you're saying.
No.
In fact, you're not even really encouraging people anymore.
No.
To try to accumulate unified consciousness, because what we have is special. We just have to tame it and put it into service in a way that we all benefit from.
That's right. I was kind of crazy when I was younger, and I would like fast bikes, and some people that lived down the road from me when I lived in Ohio had this Arab stallion. Most beautiful horse that I'd ever thought of riding. We became friends, and they had a lot of thoroughbreds, and they had Tennessee walkers. They had 300 acres of horses. And so I'd walk down there and visit with them. So I got to where I would, when their horses needed their tendons reattached, I have very long, supple fingers. I'd do it for them. I got to where I was pretty good at it. So their idea would be to reward me with any horse I wanted to ride or whatever. So one day I said, I came down this morning and I saw that smoke going out of that horse's nostrils. I said, I got to ride him. Oh, no, nobody can ride that horse. So after about getting bucked and thrown and so forth, I did finally break in that horse. But it was one of the hardest things I ever did. And I never climbed back on any animal so many times. But it was worth it. It was worth it. Because the horse and I became good friends after that. That's the way I look on intensity. People with split consciousness have a range of intensity that's just awe-inspiring. The extended community is even interested in it. If it can survive, then the universe welcomes variation. And I don't see any reason why it can't. It's just a matter of, it's late in the game. There's a lot to overcome. I think unity...
But it's not too late.
Yeah, I think unity can do it. I think you pointed out to Egypt and what's going on there. And it's interesting how the mass media in this country is trying to misrepresent that. I mean, you get in all kinds of bizarre, where they'll say one thing and then they'll say another and everything. I was listening to some reports. But your take on it is very good and true. It's a model for the rest of the world. It's especially a model for us.
It is. I tell you, I've not had a chance to talk about it publicly. I've posted a couple of things on Facebook, but you and I have talked about it privately. I'm really so excited about this because the general impression has been, especially for people paying attention, that there are only two ways out of this, and one of those is a bloody revolution. You know, they come and take your guns, you kill them, they kill you, and hopefully the last guy standing is the right person.
That's right.
But what just happened in Egypt should happen here. Our Constitution was set up to ensure that something similar would happen here, in that their military got in between the corrupt government and the protesters and protected them from the corrupt government because they were all on the same page.
I'll tell you something, Crystal. I think that if millions of people hit the streets here, I think the same thing would happen here because, to tell you the truth, the horror media are the only people that are telling anybody that there is any popularity in this regime at all. And this is not an administration, this is a regime, and it's a regime because it will not uphold what it was sworn to uphold when it came into office. The Constitution, and that's our social contract, whether they like it or not. And if they betray that, they have no authority. They have no authority. We have tyranny, and we're not a people that contend with tyranny very long. People need to take courage in the belief, which is real, that if the same thing happened here, the result would be the same. There would be some blood first. I mean, they would beat some people probably to death because there's always an element of thugs. There's always a matter of psychos that they have out there working for them. People are wise to that now. They know that that does not represent the police, that does not represent the military, these Blackwater thugs that they hire as mercenaries. Something wrong with anybody that will be a mercenary anyway.
Yeah, self-sword. Yeah, there's nothing good that comes from that. Yeah. But the point about Egypt is because the military did not disengage itself from the commoner, because they too are people and they too have families and they too will be subject to laws that aren't fair.
It's no different here.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the parallel that I'm hoping that people will get from what happened in Egypt, because the leader would not listen to the cries of the people, and the military gave them an ultimatum. You have 48 hours to respond, and you need to respond in a particular fashion, and if you don't, then you're done. They didn't, and they were done. It wasn't a bloody revolution. You don't see body bags everywhere. You have people who work together because they are together. They are in the same boat, and they recognized it, so nobody's trying to sink the boat for a couple of coins because they know they need it to survive.
It was interesting. I watched Fox today, and they had commentators about Obama's reaction to this.
I'll bet he's not happy.
Oh, he was threatening Egypt if they didn't put this guy back in power in his subtle, mealy-mouthed way.
He has no business threatening the free people of another country that get to make their own choices.
You mean like he's doing in Syria right now?
Yeah, exactly. No business. This is something people need to consider because the propaganda is so immense and they've bought it hook, line, and sinker. You would not tolerate an Egyptian president threatening you with retribution if you don't pick the leader he wants for your country.
That's right.
We'll have to start putting the shoe on the other foot.
Fox didn't either. It blew me away. For a major network, and of course they had their lines, they had their spill for Israel and all this crap. They have a guy that is going to lie for Israel. But all that aside, they still, all the commentators, there were 2 men and 2 women, they were saying essentially the same thing, What is our president up to? And they had criticized that the same way you are. Anybody with any sense would. But they did, and I was amazed because they all saw this as a good thing. They all saw what the people were doing in Egypt as a good thing.
I tell you, it's a template, a beautiful, concise, precise, well-measured template for the best solution with the least amount of bloodshed. And it doesn't really get much better than that.
It doesn't get any better than that, and it came about because those people went out in the street en masse, and they stayed there.
You know, it reminds me of that saying from Martin Luther King that people who love peace need to organize as effectively as people who love war, and there's truth in that, a lot of it.
Well, the only difference is that, like what Gandhi taught us, is that you have to be more vigilant. What usually happens is the reactionaries keep getting more violent, and what they end up doing is committing more and more of the masses against them with their violence. And you see, these monsters don't realize that. They think, well, we just go out and bash enough heads, everybody will back down. Well, they didn't do it in Egypt, and they won't do it here much longer. And that's what it takes. What you and I are talking about is peaceful revolution.
Yes.
That's what we're talking about. And you know, I never thought of myself as a revolutionary. I read quite a bit about revolutionaries, great ones like Prince Peter Kropotkin, who was a very humane man, a very wealthy man in Russia. And yet he spent his time in prison for bucking the regime. And that's what we have today. We have a regime that does not follow the law, that figures with a pen they can pick up and change it at will. No checks and balances because we've got cowards in Congress, cowards and corrupt men.
Yeah, the corruption is real.
And we have a Supreme Court that's packed with Illuminati. So our checks and balance system has failed. So everything's got to be redone. Not just a new leader. We need to clean the system of everyone that has conspired with these leaders that we've had to undermine the republic. We have a republic form of government, and that is what needs to be replaced, and everyone that's had any part in undermining it needs to be removed from power.
Yes, and of course, all of this is important not from a political party affiliation perspective, but because people have to understand that these people are not accountable to anyone anymore. And so they have put themselves in a situation where they are killing nature to kill us. They're abusing and weaponizing natural systems with advanced technologies and misapplying the knowledge. And that has one final outcome. So this isn't just a political, I want to keep my guns, Second Amendment issue.
Never was. You know, in the Bill of Rights, the purpose of the Second Amendment is stated very strongly that in the course of events, if the government no longer represents the will of the people have recourse to change it. And that's the purpose of the Second Amendment.
Of course, that's from past experience.
Yeah. Well, these were learned men. These weren't ignoramuses that you hear every day in parliaments all over the world, that you hear at the United Nations, and that you hear in our Congress. Most of them are ignoramuses. They have no feel for history. They have no feel for the Ten Commandments even.
No, they have a feel for silk and silver, though.
Oh, yeah. When someone like Riley, like Madman Riley, and he is kind of, you know, when he comes out and he says they're too busy raising money to solve problems. Well, that's exactly what he said here recently. He's absolutely right. He said a mouthful. You know, I don't like him. Half the people I don't like, I have more respect for than I do for people like Eric Holder, who is a monster.
Yeah.
Stupid, idiot, sloven monster. He'd lick the boot black of any monster that's above him.
Yeah, he's a full-blown eugenicist all the way, which is never a good thing. So anyway, that's really the bulk of my story that has been so hard to communicate because, you know, you try to talk to New Age people about it and they think that they can go meditate or pray it away, or if we think happy thoughts, or if that won't work, well, let's go have an out-of-body experience and ignore it.
And if you interfere, you're negative.
Oh, yes. Yes, you're going to make it happen if you think about it. Look, I'm thinking about it because it's happening. It's kind of the opposite, you know. So there's that. Of course, the religious perspective is just as bad, only the names have changed because it's been written in stone and it's going to go south no matter what, so there's nothing we can do about it, which is absurd because if you
You,
believe you have a creator who gave you free will, why would you not use it to make the
uh,
best of your situation?
you
So that
can't
doesn't make
replace
sense.
one myth with another and come out ahead. I don't try to speak for God, and I'll be the first to say I'm no closer to the face of God than you are. Anybody is. I see design, and it's there
Yeah,
for anybody to see. Look at the sun.
yeah.
Look at what's around the sun. Look at what people are seeing every day, not too far from Earth.
Even if that's testing people's limits to go off planet to look for design, you still see it in the trees. The Fibonacci sequence, the golden ratio, it's everywhere. It's not an accident.
No.
So, I think we can see the face of God in terms of its reflection in the creation because the creation says a lot about who created it. It's beautiful. It's
Well, you
beautiful.
definitely see the evidence. I mean, it's irrefutable, and it's there for anybody to see. But it's like with anything else here. We have people that are entrained to believe that ego should be one of their dominating aspects. That's not true. There are a number of people that never buy into that, and we like them. You know, uh,
Yeah.
we like
Yeah.
those people, but we don't like the ones that are ego driven and think that's the way they should be, that go to a bar and boast and so forth. Even their wives get tired of them after a while.
I think the other thing about that too is, in terms of the pendulum going too far one way, when there's not that really nice, beautiful interchange that keeps everything nice and balanced. So you have people that go too far with the ego, and then you have the people that want to destroy it or believe that they can. And neither of those two are the right answer.
That's right.
Our,
That's right.
our ego
It's
is our personality, it's our individuality. How can you put it into service for everyone? That's the ultimate goal, is what can I contribute with it? What can I give with it? Because when we give, we also grow from the experience of giving. It's never one-sided.
no, it's never one sided. And we have to accept certain things about each other and be tolerant. This is the one thing that's lacking in all of these equations is tolerance. And one of the greatest movie producer of all time was D.W. Griffith. It's so much harder to portray expression and a number of other things in a silent movie, and he was a silent movie producer, and the greatest movie that he made was called Intolerance. It deals with 4 different periods of history. It was made in 1916. And even though when you see the movie, we know some of the things that are depicted didn't exactly happen as they did because we have a little more refinement today in determining ancient history. But he's right on the money about the evils associated with power. If we couldn't be led by these evils associated by power if there wasn't a certain element of intolerance of others and ourselves. And this comes through in that movie. The movie was made in 1916. It's a silent, but it's a great. I think that you should see the movie. Know that you're not going to be as amused by the method that it's made of, but if you appreciate the fact of its limitations, and then you see a great story, and you see the vision of the movie maker, and it is great in that way.
There's a lot of truth in that. I have said before, and I think when the first couple of times I said it, I think it shocked people, but I genuinely love every human being on this planet. I know what they're capable of, but I don't particularly like a lot of them. I don't have to like them to appreciate them. I don't have to go to dinner with people. I don't have to hang out with them to appreciate what they can offer if they would decide to, because everybody has something to offer. We all have family members. They're family. We love our family. That doesn't mean we want to hang out and go to dinner. I think that free will and tolerance is really just a word that's abused a lot for accepting the free will choices of another human being. And I think that everybody has the right to make their own choices until they become destructive to others and their environment. And that's where the limitation lies.
Well, everything should be qualified with reason and logic. And see, all the ancients understood that. I would say that Socrates' ability to discern is equal to any computer that'll ever exist, and anybody that is a PhD in literature or ethics or law, of course, he was very verbal. And, he made everybody feel uncomfortable. And he had committed no crime except being truthful. When he was judged, he had to drink that cup of hemlock.
Oh my God.
But, would I be a Socrates? Yeah, I would have been a Socrates, and you would have too. I'm not going to capitulate. I'm not going to lay down when I know I'm right. You see, there are a few people like that in the world, and they were put here. You were put here. I was put here to make people feel uncomfortable about their wrong decisions. And we put a pretty good job of it, Crystal.
Yes, a better job than a lot of people can appreciate.
That's the point. But I'll tell you what, there are a few negative aspects to it, but I'll tell you what, you don't feel any less free or infringed upon because of what you've been doing, do you?
No, I feel the opposite. I feel so much freer. Nobody can manipulate me with a paycheck. I've worked in situations where people tried to bribe me. I've been threatened. I've seen a lot. That's just gone, done, over with. My life is mine. My time is mine. I do with it what I want. And it matters so much more because it's mine.
That's right.
And that's a lot of people miss that. People think, well, I get up every day and work so I can live. Then you have other people, well, I live to work. They're not really interchangeable.
Well, they are lost. They are afraid of their own leisure time. Leisure time is so important for an individual to grow. And when they don't have it, I love my stepfather. And it really saddened me to watch him wither away and die after he retired. He had worked 35 years for General Dynamics. And he withered and died with the help of corrupt medical treatment. He deserved to retire in his golden age, and he didn't get that opportunity. No one I know ever deserved it more.
Yeah, that's something that's really backwards too, isn't it? So you spend all of your youth working so that you can relax at an age where you're too old to enjoy it.
Well, he went through a lot. He went through World War II in the Pacific fighting the Japanese. He was at Guadalcanal whenever the Japanese decided they wanted it back, and there were very few Marines there to protect them. He was in the Seabees. So he talked about how they just dumped all these weapons out on the ground and said, whoever takes the BARs, the Browning automatic rifles, they go to the front. He said there weren't too many people picking those up.
I'll tell you, there's not a sane human being on this planet that doesn't long for the day that we can put our guns down for good.
That's right. I'll tell you what, I own guns, and if I was assured that everybody, the military, the police, everybody else was going to melt them down, I'd be the first. Yeah. But as long as there are people that feel like they can come in my house and take what they want and have guns, I'm going to have guns. And I don't give a damn whether there's a law, somebody takes up a fountain pen and says this cancels the Second Amendment. I don't care. As long as people can come into my house with guns and take what I have or harm people I care about in my home, I'm going to have guns. Now, you can take whoever's listening to this or writing it down, you can take it for what it's worth. If that criminalizes me, I don't care because it doesn't criminalize me in the eyes of those I care about.
Well, I think, that's important too, which goes back to what we were talking about a while ago. An individual is not doomed to repeat a history they don't remember, but they are doomed to repeat a history that was deleted because there is intent to repeat it. So very few people living today know that historically the pattern of gun confiscation is the precursor to genocide.
Always has been.
Yes.
It always has been. After they took the guns in England, and I was talking to a London Bobby who was on vacation, and he came into a flea market where I was set up as a flea market dealer. And we were talking, and I mentioned that, and he said, you know, we never had home invasions in England until they took our guns. If you can recall, home invasions are the most violent of all, and quite often the people are murdered in cold
Yeah.
blood. It's because the criminals have the guns. They know that these honest people in that house, they don't have any guns, so they're not afraid.
Well,
Now,
that's just it. Criminals don't follow the laws.
well, of course not. And there are all kinds of bumper stickers now for 20 years that say something like this. They'll say, when guns are outlawed, only outlaws will have guns. And of course, that's true. Can't be argued.
All right, James. Well, I don't know if you have any other questions for me.
Well, no, I don't. You know, I had a step by step thing I was going to follow. That just went to hell. Sorry.
Sid, that's okay.
I think it's my fault more than yours because I just too many things I want to talk about with you. You evoked that in me, my dear.
You know, for a lot of us, it's rare to find people who really understand our predicament and can talk about it openly without fear. And that's what I enjoy, I think, most from our friendship is that you and I really get our predicament. Fear is a choice, but the danger is real.
That's right.
And we have to face it. We have to take care of it. And, you know, it's rare to find people that can approach it that way and be really completely honest about it. And I really enjoy it. And like I said, I mean, you really were really the only other person that I found who was saying that we will do ourselves in again, that we are on that path. No, I couldn't find anybody else saying it, and almost as rare as people that want to hear it.
Well, thank you, Crystal, and you're a very rare lady. You have become a close friend of mine and colleague. I have absolute respect for you. We have a rare understanding and communication, and I wouldn't trade that for anything.
I wouldn't either. It's been a real joy.
Even my extra rib. You knew I was going to do that, didn't you?
No, but you can keep your ribs. I think I've got enough.
Okay. Well, I can't. I don't know. It's just something in me that I just want to take a jab at people's myths sometimes. If that isn't a myth, nothing is. You know, there are Hindu myths that make more sense than that.
Maybe we should define that really quick. People don't really know what a myth is. I talked about it a little bit in the article in a way that I think was very precise in that part of the dumbing down process is mystification.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to really understand the science behind it. So then you're going to go to a guru who still, if they want to maintain their guru status, is not going to demystify it for you because then they're your channeler and all these other things. And what will happen is, because people can't explain it in scientific terms, mythology fills in the blanks. Mythology and superstition becomes their way of trying to fill in what they can't explain in ways they should be able to explain it.
You know, you won't ever find anybody trying to explain a myth, but you'll find all kinds of people who jump up and say, well, the Bible says this. And you try to say to them, well, you know, the Bible has come through so many hands. For the most part, it's an adulterated document. How can you say it's the word of God? This has been taken out, and that's been taken out. This has been rewritten, and so forth. The only person that ever did a scholarly Bible was burned at the stake for it.
Yeah, and that's the other important thing, you know, which I think more people are getting is there are some lessons that are so beautiful and timeless that all religions have some semblance of. But the rest is really kind of filler that is more political than anything. And if you look at Jesus Christ and, you know, people worship, you know, like Gandhi and Martin Luther King and these wonderful people, they were all murdered because they wouldn't go with the flow. They wouldn't play ball because they understood it was wrong. They were murdered because they were peaceful people and wanted the right thing.
I can't understand anybody claiming to be righteous that doesn't follow the Ten Commandments in the name of Christianity or any other belief today, because all beliefs that have survived into the present, and there have been some bizarre beliefs that I'm glad didn't survive, like the belief that the Thuggees had in India of killing people that weren't believers.
Or the world was flat.
Yeah, well, that's still believed by a number of people today, and most of them, I think, sit in the House of Lords in England. But I shouldn't say that because there's some wonderful people that have stood up for what's right in the House of Lords. Lord James, for one. You don't just pick and choose if you're going to follow something and to be devout. And there's no point in being religious and not being devout, in my opinion. You follow what has been given us as handed to Moses, the Ten Commandments. When you support the kind of thing that's been going on, one administration after another, and now this regime, how can you say that you are following the Ten Commandments? And when you're a preacher or you're a deacon of a church delivering something before the congregation or whatever, and you don't stand up and you don't speak out against the killing, it's come to a point where we have a tyrant that can order a person killed without any charges and you don't stand up and say, this is outrageous, this is ungodly, and you don't oppose it with your mind, body, and soul, then you're not a Christian. You're not following the Ten Commandments. So what are you? You're hollow. You're a vacuum because you are living a lie. And I would say most people today that are thinking of themselves as devout anything are living a lie.
That's really true. One time Edgar Cayce was asked about God, the meaning of God, and he said, what is God? God is life.
Yeah.
And that's the truth.
It's a joy of life.
Yes. So how can you take it and worship God? That ultimately was part of the message that I learned when I was doing that experiment about leaving records behind. That was the other thing. And of course, this is in the article, which is much more detailed about all of this. But this is why I didn't really get into it too much in the first book, because once you realize that by leaving detailed records behind, you run the risk of reinfecting a new civilization with a how-to guide if the wrong people find it. So then you begin to think, okay, well, what if I move to a more principle-based approach where maybe I could just, leave like maybe 10 principles or guidelines to live by, like 10 or 12, and we could call them the 12 principles of peace, and that by honoring these rules or guides, we automatically preempty the ability of that kind of future to manifest. So yeah, we could call it the 12 Principles of Peace, or we could call them the 10 Commandments.
Your ancestors had discovered this. And the first planet that they had, they called the planet of peace. And it was because of that. They put that first. They didn't have war. Why they wouldn't come into the extended community is beyond me. But beautiful people.
But that's the thing, though, isn't it, in the end, is even if you try to get out of the details and you just leave the principles behind, we already have those.
Yeah.
And because they're empty words, nobody follows them, so they don't matter.
No. It's always been the leaders that take the exception and the people follow not far behind. The leaders lied to us when they got us into the war in Vietnam, and it became a debacle. It robbed so many young men of their youth. And it killed many civilians, maimed and scorched them.
And of course, they've admitted that war is also one of their tools of depopulation.
Of course. If they didn't meddle in the affairs of people, there would be no need for dealing with the population one way or the other, because it would take care of itself. If we were natural, if we had the regard for nature, and we didn't let despots and madmen take power over us, things have pretty well worked out. They always have. I think that we are admonished biblically for Christians' benefit, and all you're getting, get knowledge. How many people do that? There are people who call themselves Christians.
Yeah, they don't even know who Christ was either. They don't know he was in a scene. And that's an interesting thing. So he supposedly was ministering for 20 years before he died, and if you get a Christian Bible, how many words in red by Jesus do you find? Yeah. Where's the rest?
Where is the rest? Well, there's so many things that are left out or changed in the King James Version, and there are people that think this is the Word of God. It isn't the Word of God, it's the Word of man. And arrogant men who think they have a right to speak for God. It's one thing for someone to follow. It's another thing to try and speak for God. And, you look at TV evangelists telling you that God wants you to send $200 or whatever. Anybody who does that is a liar, cannot believe in God, because if he did, he would know to be afraid of that hypocrisy, that he has committed blasphemy.
I talk about this all the time. Our free will is so severely limited by lack of knowledge. Love is not all we need, which is also why in the Bible it says, my people perish for lack of knowledge.
That's
And
right.
it's the truth.
That's right. That's the most important admonition there is. Because even if you are righteous, if you have no knowledge, you will end up following an evil man or woman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. I've used the example of the fluoride drops I gave my son for 3 days because I didn't know any better, and I
You
gave it
didn't
to
know
him
better.
because I
No.
loved him.
People talk about fluoride. I talk about when I was growing up, toothpaste tubes were made out of lead.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's how unthinking people can be. They want to put mercury in our fillings, and today, you can't tell people that are afraid of knowledge because it makes them feel uncomfortable.
It does, but that's one of the reasons that I termed, what I learned the sacred science, because I want people to always be aware that science is life. That's what it is. That's what it will always be until you take the sacred part away, and then it's death.
If I was a activist leader, I would start everything off that I ever said into the public. If I was giving a lecture, I was standing in front of a demonstration or whatever, I'd say this before I start anything. This is what you need to know to be free. And proceed. And then do my best to enunciate the principles of what you need to know to be free.
Yeah.
And you cannot be free if you don't know what the people that are in power, threatening your freedom, threatening the potentials of what you can have and what you can do next, are up to.
You can't be free if you don't even know you're a slave.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, debt slavery is bad as any other kind. This is what people don't understand.
Yeah, that's a more obvious form of slavery. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would like to talk about more information, more knowledge, more proper knowledge about the sun to demystify the cycle garbage so that people can understand that a great deal of work goes into ensuring that we have what we need to survive because evolution requires it.
Well, I think it's foolish to try to make something that you need for your life a villain, to make it seem like a threat or whatever.
You mean like carbon, plant food?
Yeah, like so many things that they have us convinced. And now they're trying to make us fearful of the sun. Oh, it's solar cycle 24. Oh, this, oh, that. And the fact of the matter is, if they'd leave the atmosphere alone, the sun wouldn't be bothering us right now, would it?
No, it would balance itself. And then you've got the the pole shift is coming and Nibiru is coming. And again, I know that I sound, like I'm harping on it. And I guess in a way I am because it's so important. But we are on the path of self-destruction and we are really, really far down that road. We are at the fork and we have to choose, and we don't have a lot of time left to choose a different path. And so people really can't, kind of poo-poo this and, I'd rather worry about Nibiru. The problems we have on this planet, they can only be solved on this planet by the people on this planet because they're being caused by people on this planet.
People that buy into Nibiru and that buy into the false flag alien thing and all this, I look at them like this. You're afraid of your personal responsibility and what your common sense will tell you need to do. So you blame it on something that can justify, that can justify in your mind doing nothing. Why should I do anything? Because the hostile aliens are going to be here and they're going to bake my children in the oven and all this horse manure. You got all this crap going on, and you try to speak common sense to them. They just look at you with their mouth open. You say the ETs haven't bothered anybody now. They've been around. They've been in discussions now for thousands of years. There's been evidence of them. And now all of a sudden they want the planet because, why? We've turned it into a wastebasket? Get real.
Yeah,
Get
it's
real.
contaminated. It's in the throes of death.
And they talk about Nibiru, and so we're supposed to believe that this advanced society hasn't grown up in all this time and all these many thousands of years hasn't grown up and is still coming back because it prefers our women or it does this or it does, whatever horse manure. That's another excuse for doing nothing.
That's right. That's right.
And there's no excuse. If you had a healthy sense of outrage, you'd be upset over what is being done in your nation's name.
Yes, does anybody think that what just happened in Egypt would have happened if they were blaming everything on reptoids?
No, those people have more common sense. I was overjoyed to see those pictures of all those people in the street. I mean, those people were as close together as they could get comfortably, for as far as the eye could see. And I'm thinking, man, I love you all.
Yeah, can you imagine how much energy that was in one place? I bet it was really great.
Oh, it'd be great to be there.
Yeah.
It'd be great.
Maybe we can be there here.
Yeah, well, I hope so. I hope so. I
Yeah.
hope the day will come where people will just take their lunch and go out and stand in the street, talk to each other, and, invite the police in. Invite the police. Treat the police with respect. And anytime you see somebody trying to start trouble, repress them.
Mm-hmm.
Grab them. Grab them,
Zip
hold them and say, Officer, this man's trying to start trouble.
Yeah, zip tie them and put them in the corner until somebody can come and pick them up.
That's right. That's right. You have to tell people what their potentials are when they have been enslaved in their own mind. You have to free them and tell them what their potentials are and tell them that they haven't lost them just because they've been in a period of fear. And once you do that, you empower them.
Yes, they haven't lost their freedoms just because someone said they never had them to begin with.
No, they haven't lost them. All it takes is assertion for them to realize that they've got power, that they can give meaning and power to their self-expression with knowledge. In order to be what they're supposed to be, they need knowledge. Not knowledge from the mouth of other men, but their books. There are all kinds of ways of finding the truth. Go back to school if you don't like to read. Find somebody that you respect to teach you a number of ways.
Spend time in nature.
Yeah.
That's where a lot of the greats learned. They watched nature. They watched how it would fold and refold itself, how it would balance itself, how the streams stay cool in the heat. Most of the greatest minds that we've had, which most people don't even know we've had, never attended college. They learned from nature.
No. That's absolutely true. In fact, I have a friend, and he doesn't have a place of high value on teaching because he feels like if you can't do, you teach. That's not true of people that are fine teachers and want to inspire their students, but they can't keep their job because they're not willing to submit to a syllabus they don't agree with. If we were allowing good teachers, we'd have them. We have what the system wants us to have and nothing more. For 100 years this has been true, and it's more apparent in the United States than anywhere else in the world. We have all the money for education that we need, but we don't have the teachers because the system will not tolerate good teachers.
No, the system does not want an educated populace. They want good little global citizens who can repeat for a reward. That's what they want.
And a good teacher's not going to stay in that very long. It's just like a good doctor is not going to be on friendly terms with the hospital because the administration of the hospital is out to make as much money, and they want money-making doctors. Doctors that will give unnecessary operations and charge more than they should for them.
And I really think that people need to do everything they can to get rid of Obamacare because it's just one more layer to the data mining system that will empower them to become more effective with their depopulation tools.
Think of Obamacare like this. You got a casino. You're at the roulette tables. Obamacare is an actual raker, another raker. There's the raker for the House, and there's the raker for Obamacare. And that's what he does. That's what Obamacare is all about. It's the government taking a rake off.
Yes, it's a levy, it's a tax, it's forced, but even aside from all of that, It's going to refine their models of depopulation based on the feedback they're getting from people's health reports.
Of course. It is an area where non-healers come in and have more to do with making decisions than the healers. We had the Hippocratic Oath. I know that most doctors don't follow it. They like to wear it on their coats, and maybe they'll even have a pen, but they don't follow it. But at least it's a standard they know they should. These boogers that are going to be making all these policies don't even have that. They don't even have a semblance of a code of conduct of a healer.
No, but I just want to be clear about what I mean. Let's say that they're trying a new chemtrail concoction, and it's not working. It's not effectively making people sick the way they want it to. Through our lab work, through access to our medical history, our genetic history, they're going to begin to formulate patterns that will help them refine it.
Yeah, make more smart viruses. They want to get a certain part of the population, so they have a smart virus, or they have something that they know will be more effective against a particular ethnic group or a racial group, so forth.
They can refine their genocidal methods and, as always, laugh all the way to the bank while they do it.
Yeah. When you go in a certain direction, there is no longer any control. And they're going in a direction that there is absolutely no control. They can actually become a trend, like what they're planning, can actually develop a mind of its own. And I'm not talking about Mr. Computer. I'm talking about anything that represents a widely distributed virus, a widely distributed pollutant of any kind that is going to be used intentionally selective. You don't have the selective controls over it, because what's going to happen is there are going to be opportunistic side effects. And these side effects will become more catastrophic than what they intend as the genocidal agent.
That needs to go bye-bye. People need to get rid of that, because that's all that's for. Obamacare is not about making sure people get free health care. That is not what it's about.
Hell no. Well, Crystal, I think this is a good time to end our interview. Perhaps we'll do another. I hope so.
Yes, I would like to do one with you. I've been planning it for a while, and we've been talking about it. We just haven't done it yet. About more information, more knowledge, more proper knowledge. All right, James, and I really, really appreciate you offering to do this with me.
My pleasure.
And I appreciate Patrice, also the owner and creator of Information Machine. It's a wonderful blog, and I appreciate all the support he's given us as well.